Alright, so just going through and making a few little adjustments. Especially on here, we've got one key that's been pressed in and this other one's going to be hanging out by a cable. Just extra little bits of detail, as much detail as we can possibly throw into this thing, the better. Okay, and just working on some cables for the inside here. So I've got some that go up into the radio, some that just go past, overlapping. Just fill this thing with wires. Alright, so inside here we'll have some wire segments. You could do this much better with an array modifier. I simply chose to do it with curves. And just separating them out so that we can edit each one individually. Just to have some that flick off, some that have a little bit more thickness, and yeah, just making it look a little bit more random. This thing's either been torn off or cut off, so if it needs a little bit more randomness to it. I duplicated that to another layer and converted it to a mesh. There's way too much geometry in there at the moment, so I took it back and I brought it right down just so we could fill in the ends a little and have that as an actual geometry. And just duplicating that around to a few of the points. I'm using link duplicates, by the way, just for easier editing. I'm just adding a few of those little buttons there. Make it look like they do something. And just extend them out and out of sight. And up here we're going to have a few switches and dials. I'm using an empty here to control the little ball in the middle, just so that we can rotate it around and have it work accordingly. As you can see, when we rotate it, it will sort of deform a little. So just adding a little pipe along there to work as a pivot. Now I spend probably a little bit too long on this section, I think, but you can feel free to do something much more simple. This is just a sort of a replica of one that I happen to have sitting on my desk. And yeah, very convenient when you have stuff lying around. I'm actually working on the top section, making that connect up correctly. And we're going to have a few of these, just probably 3 or 4, I think, and just a few labels underneath them. You can see I wrote left, and I have another one called right, and I have another one called both. And just change the colors there so that we can see them. Alright, I don't like how that was positioned. So I duplicated them up so I could have a few switches. And just created a bit of a side switch on this as well. And just connecting them up. Alright, so these things are just going to be hanging on. So something like that. And give it a nice big dangly cord that you can have wrap around as well. It's a good idea when you're doing these cables to have a nice amount of sag, which will definitely make them feel a lot more realistic. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding in a little bit of a clip, just sort of like I've been taped on. Right now with these, it's going to add in some more switches. And we're onto the rest of the interior. So we've got a box here. Now this is just going to be sort of like an ammunition box where we store the ammunition for the front machine guns. Just adding in a few edge loops there, so when we go on to sculpt it, it will deform correctly. And I'm just using one of those clips from the from our dash, just to save time. Alright, so just making sure that opens correctly. We want to have that so that it will open and close. And just going to create some rivets so that it will attach correctly. And we do edit these rivets later on. Instead of using a subsurf, we just use a bevel. And yeah. I've also used a displacement map mapped to the object location so that you can move those around and they will deform and be different to each other while retaining the same object data. Alright, so I've used a displacement modifier on these. So just before I go in and do the subsurf, I'll do the multi-resolution. Just to make it look a little bit older, a bit aged, a little bit more destroyed. Put a bit of an indent on the seat there, make it look a little more connected. And setting up some basic materials so that we can differentiate between them. There's our ammunition from before. Just have it wrap around a little in the box and just in general make it look a bit more chaotic. This ammo has probably just been chucked in there, it's not going to be fantastically placed. And when working with curves, it's a good idea to start from one end and work your way to the other, because it will adjust the... I'll start from the back end and work your way forward, as it will adjust the curve on the other end. Alright, so I'm about happy with those. Right now what I'm doing is I'm creating a bracket for the rocket launchers. This will just come over and stick onto the armour. Just to hold it on there, make it look a little more believable. And also by having it not wrap all the way around, you can have it break off, and that would look pretty cool. Alright, so just once again using rivets. And grouping up those rivets so that we can control them a little easier. Which makes them a bit easier to select. happy with that. So got rivets over everything. And I'll show you later on when we come back out of Dynamics mode how I went about all the rivets. And that'll be in 5 minutes if you want to skip ahead. Alright, so what I'm doing now is just adding in some bare cables around. As we saw in the brief, we need some exposed wires, so having plenty of them around is always good. Alright, and what I'm doing there is just linking them up with some hooks, and that will allow us to move around the ends and have them connect accordingly. Just a couple more pipes. And just adding rivets everywhere definitely makes things look more awesome. Rivets with a different shader, so they look weird right now, but they will become much more subtle and just add the extra level of detail a little later on. And you can use rivets to connect to a normal map, and that will work great. So copy them over to the other side. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make some vents. So I was sort of messing around a little, trying to decide what type of vents I want to have. First off, I try to have these vents that curve inwards, but I don't really like this idea. So I go for the standard horizontal vents, and we copy them down using F3. We pull those out, and we'll curve these around. Oh no, I cut them. An easier way to do this other than cutting is you can just rotate by 1 degree and then scale along X. But actually, that's also what I do. I do that. Yeah, so you can either use the shear tool, which is very slow, as in it's a very subtle movement. So rotating by 1 degree and scaling along X is much faster. Alright, so just using the bevel tool there. Alright, and just a few more loose wires up here. And we're about ready to wrap up. yeah, just putting a little connector there as well. It's a little more interesting. And yep,